This podcast is made possible through donations from listeners like you and our partners at Tallman Equipment, where they pride themselves on equipping their customers with the tools they need to get the job done right. They are dedicated to set the standard for quality, convenience, and reliability. At Tallman, your opinion is important to them. Rate and review any product or tool you've used on their new website at tallmanequipment.com. Line 11 Clothing Company, making apparel for our first responders with a positive message to patriots that you can be proud of. A proceed of the cost goes to helping our foundation ignite the fire for father engagement. Give them a follow at Line 11 Clothing on Instagram. And last but not least, Monzingo Knives. Each knife is created with craftsmanship that only a tradesman could provide. Find them on Instagram at Monzingo Knives and get your American-made Monzingo knife today. Welcome to the Show Up Dad podcast. This podcast has been created for hardworking fathers. At the Show Up Dad, we've recognized that fathers providing for their children is certainly important. But when men truly understand their unique role and gain the knowledge and skills to be great fathers, they can transform and impact future generations. I'd like to welcome Nick Politis. Nick is a groundsman for Local 47 and has been married for 10 years and has one son. In 2021, he was diagnosed with cancer, which seemed to be the beginning of a string of challenges. Welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, what's going on, man? Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, Nick. One of the reasons why I brought you on, Nick, is because as we talked before, 2020 and 2021 really kicked a lot of people's butts. I mean,
Yeah.
It was rough on me, rough on you, rough on a lot of people, you know what I mean? But that didn't keep us down. And that's the reason why I wanted to bring you on here, to bring encouragement to a lot of folks, you know what I mean, going into this new year.
Yeah. If I can say.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. So with that being said, Nick, can you please tell us, as we open up all the time, about your childhood as you remember it, if you don't mind me asking?
No, man, not at all. Gosh, where can I start, man? I mean, I'm first generation here in this country, man. My parents, they immigrated in from Greece. So they brought a lot of the old traditions with them, man. My dad worked a lot. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And my dad was just he was a go-getter, man. My family's always owned restaurants since before I was born. And he was definitely a go-getter. He worked hard, and when he come home, he always, how do I say, he always found time for us. He always came to baseball games, football games, whatever sports we played. It was a pretty normal childhood, man, with the exception of we didn't have your, I guess you can say, like all American family type traditions. Like we never went camping. We didn't do things like that. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, I grew up, not really necessarily needing anything as a kid because of my dad. And, I was raised in the restaurants and finally found my way out. But I mean, how do I say it? Yeah, I mean, pretty normal childhood, man. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary growing up, mom was actually really sick when we were younger. So that was something, I guess you can say, that wasn't normal. She had what was called Mediterranean fever. And, from what we knew, there wasn't necessarily a cure for that. And it just always made her sick, So we grew up pretty fast being young. I mean, heck, man, I was cooking full-blown meals at the age of 7 or 8, But I mean, other than that, man, I mean, we played outside, did our thing, grew up in the Inland Empire.
Man, can you elaborate on that Mediterranean fever? That's the first time I've ever heard of that, man.
So, dude, all of a sudden, man, she would just, she'd be fine one day. I mean, out with us, cooking, doing all kinds of stuff. And then, all of a sudden she was just down and out, shivering, not feeling good. It was weird, man. Like but to us, it was kind of like, well, mom, like, so, I mean, some things that weren't normal about our childhood is, I mean, we did have, growing up, we did have nannies and things like that,
Mhm.
to help out my mom because she was so sick.
Wow. I mean, that's so crazy just to see that. And then you being young, being able to recognize that, that just kind of brings to question what my kids are going to say, because we have a similar, I'm sure you've heard our story, and our podcast listeners have heard our story too, with my wife being diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, which was, Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And same thing. I mean, just crazy out of the blue symptoms to, just feeling pain and stiffness in her joints, to erratic behavior, to basically her heart stopping on Christmas Day of 2018. So, man, it's crazy to see that you remember it as a child. So I'm wondering, man, what are my kids gonna remember about my wife and the pain that she went through our journey? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'll tell you, man, your kids will, and I mean, just this, I feel kind of goes for all kids that experience something like that with a parent that's struggling and constantly trying to do their best. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they grow admiration for that, man. Like, they grow a special kind of love and bond with her because even seeing her down,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure your wife, man, just like my mom, a mother's love is second to none.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We can try to compete with that as much as we possibly can, but a mother's love is second to none. And I grew such an admiration for my mom, where, I mean, anytime my dad asked me to do something, I was like, yeah, I'll get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime my mom asked me to do something, I was like, what do you need? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
and everything, I'm there, because I know that, she loved us so much that regardless when she was sick, she was still there for us 150%.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure your kids will recognize that, in your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Out, man, she was still mom.
Mm-hmm. How did what do you remember? I know you remember that about your mom, and you picked up on that because kids are very resilient and they pay attention, right? Um, how did your dad deal with it? Like, was he supportive of your mom, or was it one of those things where he felt the stress of it, the weight of it, carrying on the family, and having to have this weight on his shoulders where he's providing, and then now all of a sudden his life partner is really sick, you know what I mean? And like, did you see any stress that he was dealing with, or did you pick up on as a child?
There was this memory, man, that I have.
Mm-hmm.
I get emotional about it because I mean it actually happened
Mm-hmm.
now that she's gone. But I remember, like I said, we grew up in restaurants. So we helped out the family businesses even as kids. And my dad didn't have anybody to watch us that weekend. So he took us to the restaurant. I was inside helping him wash dishes, cook. I was about 8 or 9 years old. I
Mm-hmm.
was taking every day, every single day after, whether it was Monday through Sunday. It didn't matter if my mom was in the hospital, my dad was there after work. Um, and I remember this day where um, we went to the hospital. It was the Kaiser in Riverside, and I remember we're all sitting in the waiting room. It was actually just me, my little brother, and my little sister. We're sitting in the waiting room, and my dad and the doctor walks in, and he says, "Hey, Mr. Politis, can we please speak with you?" And he goes, "Sure." And they walk away, and I just found that kind of weird. Like, why couldn't he say it in front of the kids? Because if it was positive news, he'd be like, "Hey guys, mom's getting better." And I remember kind of like just following around the corner and seeing my dad start breaking down, and I was like, what's going on?" Kind of thing. I didn't pry. I didn't go over there. I just saw him crying, and I remember him walking back into the room, wiping off his tears, and him saying, "Hey, let's go get ice cream. Let's go. We got to go. Let's get going."
Mm-hmm.
And there was times, man, where, I heard him cry, and I knew something was wrong. And I guess at the time, when I asked him about it years later, he was shocked that I remembered it, but it was something that I still remembered because it affected me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's crazy that you remember that. He goes, they told me that if your mom didn't start showing signs of improvement, that within the next 24 hours, that the chances of her getting better were not good.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad, just like any other dad, would try to protect us from it.
Yeah.
But he did have his moments where, like I said, he was trying to hide it from us even then,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to see it.
Mm-hmm.
He tried to stay strong through it, man, and he did. He sleepless nights, him being a restaurant owner,
Mm-hmm.
and having to deal with 5 kids being at home, and then his wife being in the hospital. It was tough on him, but he showed resiliency, man, and he overcame it.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because I had a past guest on here. He's a journeyman lineman, David, and he came on here and he was talking about a similar incident where his mom was very sick, and they hid it from the children as well. And he said that he vowed not to ever hide the proverbial elephant in the room. He wanted to be as transparent with his kids, no matter how hard it was, obviously according to what they could understand and stuff like that. But he wanted to be able to share with his kids the ups and the downs of life and what they were going through as a family unit, because he said that was so hard on him when his father would try to hide things, and I could see where a kid could think that, because you grow up thinking one minute, if they're hiding it from you, right?
Uh-huh.
And if I put myself in a child's shoes like that, and I start thinking about that, I start thinking, okay, well, what's the thing? A kid's going to grow up thinking that, hey, what's wrong with mom? What's wrong with mom? Does she not like me? Why is she always tired? Why can't she play with me? Why does she seem irritable? And if you don't know as a child, you're going to think that's her, some sort of form of rejection. And that's a big, big, big no-no when you become an adult, because now you have these rejection wounds, which are huge, huge. I'm not going to go into that too much, but they're very big, and they affect the rest of your life unless you deal with them. But a child can grow up with those rejection wounds thinking that, hey, my mom doesn't like me, when in reality, she's struggling to hold on to, you know what I mean? Just hold on to her reality. So, I'm glad to see that you were able to share that about what you saw in your family as well,
Yeah. For the most part, man, like, we knew mom was sick.
Mm-hmm.
We always knew, my dad always tells, hey, your mom's not feeling good, just kind of, don't bother her so much. She's not feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
We knew mom was sick. They didn't hide that fact, but I think that day when they told him that news, my dad didn't know how to, I guess you could say it to us.
Mm.
Like, even right now, I've thought about the day that, God forbid, doctor tells me, hey, man, there's nothing else we can do. I've played the scenario in my head, of I'd be telling my son. And it's a difficult one, man. And I guess you say, like, my dad was put on the spot right then and there. There was no cushion.
Mm-hmm.
He just, when he came to us, he tried to, like, show face that everything was still okay.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, man, that could definitely bring up issues. But yeah, for the most part, they were pretty transparent about mom being sick. I think that day, when they said that, hey, your mom isn't doing good, that's where I guess he couldn't come through with telling us,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I can't answer for your father, but I know when I was posed into that situation to where, they told me on Christmas Day that my wife's heart had stopped.
and that they're trying to resuscitate her. I mean, everything passed before my eyes while I was laying down in bed with my 3 kids. You know, I'm thinking, Lord, why is this happening to her? How am I going to tell my kids? How am I going to explain this to my kids that their mother passed? How am I going to raise these children if I got to go to work? You know, who's going to look after them? And all these different questions, you know, and I think as fathers, we're problem solvers as men, right? And we
Yeah.
want to act or at least perceive that we know what's going on. And we take on all this stress. And I think that's what a lot of us do. We take on all this stress because we don't want them worrying. It's our job to do that, right? We think anyways. We don't want our family worrying about the finances or worrying that, hey, we might only have $2 until next payday. You know what I mean? You want to just shelter them from that.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I've learned now through my own pitfalls that's not a good way to deal with things. You know, you have your spouse for a reason. You know, you have your children. You know, obviously you don't need to share that with your children, you know, the finances or anything like that. But, you know, when you have your spouse, we need to open up to them. They're your partner in life. You know, we need to be able to share with them. Hey, man, this is going on. I don't have it all together. This is what we're going to do. How do you think we should tackle this? You know, start asking questions, you know, and start sharing that and trying to come up with a plan together. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you, Nick, so we talked about your childhood. We talked about your father. We talked about your mother. I wanted to kind of go into this different transition to this topic, you know, this overcoming in life. You know, we talked earlier when we first started this about how 2020 and 2021 is a really rough year for a lot of people. I wanted you, if you could, to share your story about what happened to you with your diagnosis, if you don't mind.
No, man, not at all. So I would hope to become like Wheeler or Curtis, somebody that just, you know, shows, you know, compassion, guys, you know, that at the end of the day, man, I mean, he didn't just show brotherhood, he showed faith. He showed that, you know, at the end of the day, masculinity plays a big part in our trade.
Yeah.
Who's truck, who's got this, who's got that. But to me, what impressed me the most was how he showed me that doesn't matter. You know, he's a man of God. He's a man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
And that right there, to me, that's impressive. Mm-hmm. You know, in years where, you know, you have some guys that, you know, are atheists or whatever.
Yeah.
But you have somebody that at the end of the day didn't know me from, you know, the dude down the street. He, you know, he still shared that he was a believer, mm-hmm. and hold me close, you know, say a prayer with me. And that's the camaraderie and that's the brotherhood that I really like. Mm-hmm. You know, and feeling that, you know, I kind of feel like you know, Will he's somebody that whether I'm with Hotline or with Par or whoever, I'll still, you know, always keep in contact with that guy.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's such an impact to see someone like that. When I was in the military, I was highly impressionable. You know, I was a godless heathen running around trying to impress the guys that are 24 years old. Here I am, this little 18-year-old punk, you know, too dumb to quit. And, you know, I wound up compromising a lot in my own character because I was trying to fit in. I was trying to sneak into the bars. I was trying to do all these things to be a part of something. And I got to tell it, you know, the way it is, you know, one of the things that really impressed me were the guys like Wheeler who didn't cuss, who had that composure under fire. Not saying that they're perfect or anything like that, but man, they could get their point across without ever having to say a cuss word. And when they spoke with authority.
Oh, yeah.
And that to me is impressive, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. That's what, like, and like I said, my admiration for him was, and this goes for anybody, man. I mean, anybody that can show their vulnerability. I mean, today we live in a world that it's, you know, it's
smoke and mirrors.
Absolutely, man. Like you have you have the guys that, I mean, and we all fall short. I kind of feel like we all do this. I mean, it's just, we're not perfect.
Yeah.
We live in a world where you have, I mean, I've never done this per se, but you live in a world where right now we're fighting a spiritual fight, I guess you can say.
Mm-hmm.
And not cool to say, oh man, yeah, I'm a Christian, or, oh, I go to church every Sunday. It's cool to say, oh yeah, man, I went out, I partied, I got hammered, I did some things I wasn't supposed to do. And, being a Christian, I kind of feel like you're under fire. And when I see, somebody that just stands up and says, no, I'm a man of God, I'm a man of faith.
Mm-hmm.
We can't, I respect all religions. But, when you say you're a man of faith, that to me, that shows true character of how somebody is. You get what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Like he's going against the grain. He's like, I'm not, I can care less what dude right there about me. And that's what I feel like a lot of these guys, have shown me from Hotline, and just meeting random people. It feels good out there like that.
No, absolutely. When you run into people like that, it's definitely a blessing to see that, you know what I mean? And, I think more than ever, the love of people has grown cold. People now more sprawled out and disconnected than ever. I mean, we live in a very, very fast-paced society where people are, they're grinding, you know what I mean? Especially here in Southern California and the IE and stuff. You got your hustle going on. I call it the California hustle and flow. You know what I mean? You don't got time for anything else. You just got to hustle, hustle, hustle. You got your side gigs going on. You got all this stuff going on, and I think without really paying attention, you could kind of lose that sense of yourself where you start not becoming personable with people. You start forgetting people are actually humans and slowing down to connect with people. We're relational as human beings. We need to have that connection. And with that high speed, low drag type personality where you're just go, 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 go and grind, you know what I mean? You kind of lose that, and before you know it, you're this person who just kind of just walks over people. You see that in major cities. That's why New York is one of the cities where, they always used to tell me, you know what I mean? In New York, if you fall down, they'll walk right over you.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't have time. They're on a mission. They, need to get it from A to B, and I think people just need to slow down.
Absolutely. I agree.
Now, talking about that, we need to slow down in our families as fathers, you know what I mean? Because we not only do we carry that out in society, you know what I mean? We do that at home. We have all the patience in the world at work or whatever, we get home and then all of a sudden it's like, at least for me, I used to come home and I didn't have no patience at all with my family. I was tired. I wanted to relax, or a lot of times I was out on the road. So when I did come home, I didn't have time for my family because I needed to get caught up on all the chores that needed to take place so I could go back on the road again. And that's being that father who is disconnected, right?
Yep.
And that father who's not being really intentional with his children,
Yeah, I can say I'm guilty of that, man. My first 2.5 years in the trade, I got my first call out at 12:45.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gone, man, 2-3 weeks at a time. And the one thing I would say, and I guess you can say it was a double-edged sword because it was good and it was bad. I came home and I was just that fun dad, and I just wanted to, us go out. Let's go. Let's Disneyland. Let's go rent a house by the beach. Let's go do this,
Mm-hmm.
And it was to a point where I was kind of just spoiling them because I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
I feel, and me and my wife talked about it. I guess I was kind of doing more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
I was showing my son, because I was absent, because I wasn't there, I was showing my son that I was just this, fun, and all I did was, money just came pouring out of my pockets. We did whatever. And that wasn't reality. And I'm guilty of coming home being tired. And now that when I was working, here out of Ventura, I was coming home on the weekends and I was just like, dude, I'm tired. I would come home every weekend. I was like, I just want to hang out, or I want to go. And I felt myself being selfish towards, where I didn't think of, what my wife was going through, where she works. She was taking my son to school, getting to work by 9, leaving work by 5, having to come back, pick him up by 6, bringing him home, cooking, cleaning, doing everything, to where on the weekends when I got there, it was just free time. I didn't have to do anything. And I became selfish, where I was like, oh, I'm tired. I don't feel like doing that. Or let's just go here, wanting to do things that I wanted to do and not necessarily what my family wanted to do. And my wife had a conversation with me. She was like, and my wife doesn't hold back. She'll tell you kind of how it is. And she told me, she's like, you're being selfish. And as a dad, I was just kind of like, I'm providing, kind of like you said, I'm the provider. What do you mean I'm being? So I took that as like a jab, as an attack. I'm like, I'm out there working 24 sometimes, and you have the audacity to say I'm selfish, but I didn't realize what I was doing. And then one day it just clicked, especially when I got sick. I was like, I'm at home now, and I've been doing laundry. I've been doing everything that my wife was doing to help her. Realized, man, like, whoa, it's tough. Moms are everything. And I kind of feel like I needed to step up, like, and I needed to show and, kind of tell my son, like, this is how a man is. This is how, we help mom. We do this, and, showing him, gosh, I mean, just, that it's a two-way street when it's, when you're in a marriage, trying to influence my son on different things, and, yeah, I mean, I kind of got lost there for a second. It was just going on, but, yeah, I mean, that was kind of a big thing for me.
Yeah.
Home and seeing it and recognizing it.
And part of that's being a leader. What you're really showing was your shot to your son was what it is to be a man, what it is to be a leader, because leaders put themselves last. They're not first. One of the best leaders I possibly have seen or have had the privilege of working with was a foreman. I'm not saying he was perfect by any means. This guy was a dog. This guy freaking, he did everything, and he was a lineman. He was a man's man, right? Or so they say. But anyhow, I went on storm with him this one time, and I tell you what, man, he really shined through on that. On that storm, he was the last to eat. He was the last to go to bed. He was first one up. This guy put all of us, all his crews first. I remember I sent the groundman. I was like, hey, man, go tell Ronnie, go relieve him. And, hey, tell him to come and eat. And the groundman went out there and he comes back. I was like, tell him. And he's like, oh, dude, he doesn't want to come in. He says he's going to stay out there till everything is taken care of. And then he'll come in. And I was just so impressed with them. You know what I mean? To me, that was, in those moments, I was a true leader, putting people first. And for me, just that picture of him doing that, you know what I mean? That's something that I want to strive to do, even with this foundation, putting people first, with my family first and foremost, you know what I mean? Putting my wife first, putting my children before me, and just trying to be that leader and trying to imitate that to them so they could see what a leader is,
I agree 100%.
Now, Nick, I wanted to kind of go back to this whole cancer deal that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Talking to you earlier, we were discussing about some of the stuff that you went through, and I remember you had mentioned something about flatlining. What was that about?
All right. So, um, December of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
um, I was, so when the cancer diagnosis started, I started going through treatments. I was at stage 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I started going through treatments, and it started affecting my liver. So what happened was the doctor's like, look, do you drink? And you can ask my wife. We've been married 10 years, together like 15.
Mm-hmm.
And she's seen me, she can count on both of her hands in those 15 years that we've been together, how many times she's seen me drunk or have drank more than a beer. And so I was, dude, no, I don't drink, especially now that with this condition, I stopped drinking completely. Like even at parties, it's a Diet Coke or a bubbly, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was like, because it's the treatment started to make it look like you're an alcoholic. It's affecting your liver enzymes. It's going to send your liver into failure. So we got to stop treatment and we got to put you on a steroid. So they put me on what's called prednisone. And what the doctors failed to mention was that this steroid, for one, it actually completely drops your immune system.
Mm-hmm.
So not only was I already immune compromised because my immune system's trying to fight cancer, it now erased anything that I had an immune system. And with COVID going on, I mean, hey, we still needed to go out and get food, get groceries. I still took, proper precautions, hand sanitizer, mask on, all that good stuff. And I was going to, the stores, picking stuff up. My mom was in the hospital at the time, so I was also helping out my dad at his restaurant just to kind of help him out so he can be there for my mom. And I wound up getting really sick, man. It was probably December 20th, 21st. And I go, man, I can't go in, Dad. I'm sorry, I can't help. And he, don't worry about it, get better. And Christmas Eve of 2020, I tell my wife, I go, babe, I'm not feeling good. Like it's starting to bug, really bad. And she goes, well, do you need me to take you to the emergency room? I go, I got it. So I go to the emergency room here in Corona, and the doctor goes, oh man, you have pneumonia. So he writes me a prescription for a Z-Pack and sends me on my way. I go to the 24-hour pharmacy. I get, all I needed to get. I get the prescription. I come home, and I'm walking from my car to the door, and I'm like, man, I'm losing breath. So long story short, man, the next morning we wake up,
Mm-hmm.
Christmas Day, and ambulance had to come get me. They're like, your pulse oximeter is reading at 70. Anything below 90 is bad. So they rushed me to the hospital, and my mom's in the hospital at the same time with COVID. And so we're both in the hospital at the same time, but my mom was showing signs of getting better. So to not stress her out, nobody said anything to her about her son being in the hospital with her son that had cancer and also now in the hospital with COVID. I was like, mom's first priority. We can't, we want her to come out of this. So they admitted me with COVID pneumonia, and December 30th, I get the call from my brothers saying that mom didn't make it. So for like 3 days straight, I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep at all. Doctors were coming in, phlebotomists were coming in, labs, all kinds of stuff. And I just couldn't sleep because I didn't know what to do. The moment I started crying, my oxygen level just plummeted. It would just plummet. And my wife goes, so anyway, fast forward now to January 3rd, the night I plummeted, the night I flatlined. Mm-hmm. My cousin was actually a nurse of mine. He was one of my nurses. And I asked him, I go, hey, dude, do me a huge favor. I haven't slept in days. No, I asked them, leave me alone. Because they were coming in every 2 hours to draw blood. I go, I can't handle that right now. I need to get some rest. He goes, okay. So he came back to tell me they're not going to bother you for the next 6 hours. Go ahead and, rest.
Mm-hmm.
So all I remembered, man, was rolling over, and I opened my eyes, and I have 4 nurses right there by me. I have a crash cart next to me, and I'm naked. I was wearing sweats, and I was wearing a long sleeve t-shirt. And now I woke up completely naked underneath a gown. And I'm like, what the heck happened? And all I hear is he's back.
Mm-hmm.
And I look over to my right, and my cousin's standing there. I can see him through his mask. He's crying. And he's like, I was like, dude, what the hell are they talking about? He's back. Who's back? And he was like, dude, you flatlined. And I was like, what are you talking about? And my chest was just killing me, man.
Mm-hmm.
Chest compressions. They actually wound up bruising one of my chest muscles.
Mm-hmm.
And that was hard to breathe with. But it was just one of those, people ask me, what did you see? What did you see? I'm like, dude, I don't remember. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the last thing I'd remembered was rolling over to go to sleep and then opening my eyes to this. And it was definitely traumatizing, man. It was definitely an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody,
Mm-hmm.
And then knowing that, I came back and I made it through. That was pretty cool. I was grateful for that.
Yeah.
Grateful. I remember that night. The next day, I'm sorry, the pulmonologist came in and said, Mr. Politis, your stats are dropping. We're going to have to put you on a ventilator. And I was like, no way, because I already knew what that meant. 10% of people come back from ventilators, statistically. And I was like, no, I'm not doing it. Used it. And they were like, okay, So I told them, if it happened again where I flatline, do what you got to do. I go, but still breathing. If I'm still able to talk to you, you're not doing it. And I remember that night, man, I rolled over. And I had, mind you, I've been a believer for years. I was raised in the Orthodox Church. So I was never baptized by my own, say so. I was baptized. So I remember rolling over and just going back and forth with my wife before. She's like, why don't you get baptized? Why don't you get baptized? I'm like, I was already baptized. And it was always something that was eating away at me, like, something telling me in the back of my mind I needed to get baptized.
Mm-hmm.
It is so cliche of what I did. I rolled over and I started bargaining with God. I was like, God, if you let me survive this and see my son and my wife, I'll get baptized as soon as I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like this warm presence, man, where it was almost kind of like a deal. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
I survived it, man. I was in the hospital for 28 days. Came out of it, and the moment I could, 3 weeks later, I got baptized. It was something else, man. It was definitely traumatizing because thinking to myself, like, why me, not my mom? Why did I survive, not my mom? And definitely a humbling experience too, showing that, I'm nobody special, but my plan for God, the plan that God has for me hasn't been set yet. It wasn't finished. So, sure enough, man, the first thing I did, oxygen tank and all, I walked up there and I devoted myself, and the very next week they baptized me.
Wow, such a powerful story, man. Thank you for sharing that. And first and foremost, brother, I just want to, just give you my condolences for your mom. Such a
thank you.
Such a great loss, especially with a woman as great as your mom, and just all the story and all the memories you had that you shared with us on this podcast, so my condolences truly for that. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, when my wife passed on, she didn't pass on, but her heart stopped. She flatlined too, right? she told me that what she remembered is coming out of her body and looking down, right? She could see them working on her. And she said she could feel like all the life just coming towards her center, like from her fingertips and her toes, all like amassing like towards her center, her core. And it was one of the most horriblest pains she's ever felt. She said it just felt like pain, like the best way she could describe it was like the life was being sucked out of her, you know? And that's her experience with her flatlining, you know? So it's pretty awesome to hear another person like yourself, you know, talk about your experience with flatlining and going through that trauma, you know, and then having that survivor's guilt like you had, where you're like, man, God, you know, why am I here? Why did you take my mom? You know, and even having that bargaining stage where you're like, you know, God, if you let me survive this, I'll do this. You know, those are all symptoms, or not symptoms, but those are all part of the 7 steps of trauma. If you really look at it, you know what I mean? And that's pretty interesting to see how you lined up with that, you know, how traumatic of an incident that was, is what I'm trying to say, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And it was traumatizing, man. It was, you know, every day that I laid in there, man, I prayed, I asked, I just asked that I was able to, you know, see my son again in person, see my wife, you know, be able to hold both of them, you know, see my family, see my dad, you know, the trauma that my dad went through, you know, with this whole year, and him showing his character still, it's great to me, because I always thought hearing hearing the words, "you have cancer," was the worst thing I could have ever heard. But thinking about it, man, as being a dad and you being a dad, let's be knock on wood, to hear the words "your child has cancer" is it's unimaginable. It's so much more devastating. You know, and I had conversations where my dad was like, "Nick, I've prayed so many times, you know, God, take it out of him and put it in me."
Wow.
You know, asked for it. Like, you know, and as a dad, both of us being dads, we feel like we'd probably do the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, just to even top on that, my father said the same thing when we buried my younger brother last year, or 2 years ago, in October of 2020. You know, he said the same thing. He's like, man, why him, not me? You know, no father should have to bury his son. You know, and
Uh,
I can't even imagine that, you know, what your father felt, you know, losing his wife, and then now his son, you know, is flatlining. So, man, that's a lot, dude. That's a lot of challenges that you went through, Nick. Um, I what is one thing that you can share with our audience that you would like to get across? You know what I mean? If you don't mind me asking.
Man, there's so much, but one main thing, man, is just love your family. You know, don't ever skip a day where you don't tell your kids you love them, or you know, your wife, your significant other, that you love them. Just because, I mean, you know, us being in this trade is dangerous. You know, we never know if we're going to be coming home that night. You know, and me being sick, you know, I kept texting my wife, you know, it's just a cold. I'm going to be fine. You know, when they first took me in the ambulance, uh, it was just one of those things. Like, I didn't really get to tell her how much I loved her. I didn't get to hug my son and tell him how much I loved him before they took me. And then going through that experience, there was just so much regret. So one of my biggest things, man, where I tell my son every night, every morning, every chance I can, I tell him that I love him. I tell my wife I love you. You know, I just make sure you express that. Always express it. Because at the end of the day, man, you never know when the last time it's going to be that you say that.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, that's such a powerful story, Nick, that you shared with our audience. And I thank you so much, brother, for coming on here and being transparent. And I know this is going to reach a lot of people, brother. And man, if people have questions for you, Nick, how can they get a hold of you, bro? If you don't mind me asking.
However, man, I'm on Instagram, and they can shoot me a text message if they if they would like, man. I don't care. I mean, if you can share my phone number, I don't mind at all, man. But yeah, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, Nick Tarios, Politis, or Nick Politis, and they'll see, man. It's on, my bio on my Instagram.
Mm-hmm. Well, once again, brother, thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for coming on here and sharing your story, and you have a wonderful night, bro.
Hey, man, you too, and I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, man, and God bless.
God bless you too.